The comedy revolution referred to by the title of Nick Davis's sharp and effusive documentary, You Had to Be There, How the Toronto Godspell Ignited the Comedy Revolution, is the one that took place on television in the 70s, the creation of Saturday Night Live and SCTV and everything that grew out of them. You Had to Be There makes the case that the petri dish from which the DNA of those shows was sprung was the 1972 Toronto production of Godspell, the Jesus and His Followers as Hippie Clowns musical that had rocked the world when it premiered on Broadway the year before. The Toronto production featured a young Martin Short, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Dave Thomas, all Canadian, and, from across the river, Detroit's own Gilda Radner, who was the very first performer to be cast on Saturday Night, a show created by Lorne Michaels, who was also Canadian. You might say, okay, those performers all got their start in Godspell, so what? But the niftiness of Davis's film is that it's about Godspell, and it's about something bigger than Godspell, a pop movement that didn't have a name yet, a cultural spirit that found its way into existence almost like laughing, gas gathering in the air. In 1970, before all of this happened, what was comedy? It was stand-up, meaning the old guard from Shelley Berman to Don Rickles, and also the new guard, the young Richard Pryor and George Carlin and Cheech and Chong. It was the Joyce-on peyote counterculture antics of the Firesign Theatre. It was the scorched earth satire found within the pages of the National Lampoon. It was early Woody Allen. You Had to Be There opens with the documentary version of a self-deprecating joke. The director's confession that he's about to make a film about a fabled theater production, but he has no film footage of it. Because none exists. There's an audio tape, recorded illegally by Martin Short, who used a cheap cassette recorder and 2 mics he hung on the chain-link fence that was part of the show's set. So we do get to hear chunks of the show. And near the end, the film hits us with a special piece of footage that feels like a gift, especially as we see the players' reactions to it. But why make a movie about a production that was, in essence, never recorded? It's like the dilemma Todd Haynes faced when he made his documentary about the Velvet Underground. There is almost no footage of the VU in performance. Davis, like Haynes, comes up with ingenious ways to fill the void. He represents the show with witty animated sequences. The film makes canny use of Short's cassette tape. Mostly, though, the players, now in their 70s, sit back and reminisce, so that we get a sense of how Martin Short, for instance, grew up pretending to be Frank Sinatra in his bedroom, and how the prospect of going to college, in what was then the very stuffy city of Toronto, struck all of them with a faint despair, which is why they landed at the Godspell audition, which so many hundreds of people showed up for that it felt, in hindsight, like an American Idol cattle call, all of them competing for 10 roles. But various performers rose to the top through sheer moxie, whether it was Radner singing Zip-Dee-Doo-Dah, Paul Schaefer proving to be such an ace accompanist that he was instantly tapped by composer Stephen Schwartz to be the show's musical director, or Victor Garber, with his soaring voice and beautiful baby face, so nailing the role of Jesus that he owned it from minute one and was, in fact, the only cast member who made it into the 1973 movie version, but the Saturday Night/SCTV. Nexus represented something bold and new, a spark of performance that allowed the next generation of comedy to connect with its audience in an unprecedentedly immediate way. These weren't just comedians. They were merry pranksters turned rock stars. Saturday Night, during the year of its launch, 1975 to 76, came to seem like the Beatles of comedy. SCTV, coming from up in Canada, was maybe the Stones. And the root of both shows can be traced back to what was happening on stage and off stage too, in Toronto during that more than year-long run of Godspell. As extraordinary as artists like Pryor and Carlin were, the lifeblood of the new comedy revolution wasn't stand-up, it was improv. And that's the spirit celebrated in the documentary, the full title of which is You Had to Be There, How the Toronto Godspell Ignited the Comedy Revolution, Spread Love and Overalls, and created a community that changed the world in a Canadian kind of way. What you were seeing in the Toronto Godspell were the unofficial first not ready for primetime players before they dreamed they'd be on primetime.